Hi, welcome on everyone to a Thursday night edition of Dunked On and Dunked On Prime. Thanks so much for joining us. We got to talk about game two of the West Finals, and then we're going to talk about Dylan Harper. Really fun scouting report coming up. Let's begin though with OKC just delivering another very disheartening win for the Minnesota Timberwolves, who started off okay, but in the end, really struggled in this one and lost it by 15. Never really got closer than 11 in the fourth quarter. Maybe it was 10.
And it was close. It was only a 4-point game at halftime and kind of hovered. There was a point where it was 5. Oh, sorry, it was 8. There was a run by the Thunder at the end it was 8. It was 8 at halftime, and then the Wolves cut it to 5. And you're like, okay, Thunder missed a bunch of threes early. And maybe they can kind of keep it nick and tuck, and then you never know where it's going to go in crunch time. And then in that third quarter, the Oklahoma City Thunder go on a 14-2 run on only 8 possessions. And that really put the hammer down, and that pretty much knocked the Wolves out, and it was pretty academic from that point.
What's the biggest problem the Wolves have right now?
Oof. They got a lot of them, but I think the bigger problem from Minnesota's perspective is their defense,
Hmm.
because the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to make life hard on every opponent that they have when that team is on offense. And so you're maybe for a single game, you're hitting your threes or things are going well, you get to the line. But generally speaking, you're gonna need to win a game that's low scoring. And by that I mean ideally points per possession, not total, because that's pace is a little bit different. And they simply aren't making the Thunder in a game where they couldn't make the threes. Now they made a ton, especially in the competitive portion, of twos outside the restricted area. We'll talk about that. But the Oklahoma City Thunder finished the game 9 of 33 from 3. Still put up a 123 offensive rating and a 106.5 half court offensive rating. And simply put, if the Oklahoma City Thunder can score like that against you, you aren't going to win very often.
No, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander absolutely dominated. He dominated anyone who was put in front of him. 38 points, 12 of 21 from the field, 13 of 15 from the foul line, had a further 8 assists, and finished at plus 25 for the game. And even Jaden McDaniels, Shai shot very well against him. Oftentimes those numbers will be depressed because it's jumpers that are charged to the perimeter player. If you blow by the perimeter player, then the shot gets charged to the big man. And really anything that they tried didn't work because they didn't try switching Rudy Gobert. Shit, maybe they'll try that next. I thought McDaniels should try to back off, use his length a little bit, but he again got really frustrated, committed a further 5 fouls in this one, including a flagrant when he got upset that Shai was going up through his arm, and then that wasn't being called. But I think during the competitive portion, 5 of 8 shooting for Shai against McDaniels, and I thought Shai was largely able to get pretty decent looks using the old off arm. He may actually have a little bit of a strength advantage against McDaniels. McDaniels has to figure out a way to not let Shai get into his body. And then if Shai's alongside him, you got to just show your both of your hands, run alongside him. If you try to reach across, like he had one where he just reached completely across his body,
Mhm.
and that was just going to be an obvious foul. So that's one issue. And then the other one, which is one that I was very focused on going back to last year, and I thought it was somewhat disappointing that the Thunder never established this gear a year ago, which is Shai just working as a conventional pick and roll player. And I thought they really missed that against the Dallas Mavericks. Chet was usually spaced out and they would do some guard screening. This year, nowhere near as much guard screening. And so then Isaiah Hartenstein, who's a great screener, now they added him. So I thought they would do more of the traditional pick and roll stuff. And that's worked great. The Shai
Mhm.
getting downhill at Rudy Gobert, and Gobert just hasn't had the effect on the Thunder shots that you would expect, even though he's been in position at times. And so Shai getting to his mid-range, he's such an awesome mid-range shooter that he's one of those guys, along with like Chris Paul, KD, like you can't give him a mid-range shot from the elbow or you're just going to be dead. And so that's something that's really difficult for the Thunder to deal with. They haven't, or sort of the Wolves to deal with. They haven't tried blitzing him hard yet with Gobert out of that pick and roll. Maybe that's next, but they're concerned then that of the pocket pass, and then Hartenstein also has been pretty good with the little floater or finding Chet along the baseline if they're in the too big alignment. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker was fouling a ton as well. And DiVincenzo just gets shot right over every single time he's on Shai. They haven't tried Anthony Edwards yet. They don't want to. They tried double teaming Shai at the point of attack, and they immediately just rotated the ball for corner threes. That was what they tried in that big comeback with the zone in the regular season. They tried more of a basic zone. Thunder carved that up, including guys like Alex Caruso just hitting like shots from 14 feet. So, like, I mean, forgive the long diatribe here, but I wanted to take you through everything that they tried, really none of which has worked against the MVP.
Well, and I wanted to go to one of the other ones. You correctly noted that the Thunder haven't done nearly as much guard screening in this playoffs overall, but especially in this series as they usually do. However, Mark Daigneault has deployed it in one specific circumstance, and that is having Isaiah Joe in and using Isaiah Joe as a screener to get Dante DiVincenzo on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And DiVincenzo just can't guard Shai. And I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, tough guy to defend for players who are like sized and smaller. But it's even more to me. It's more not egregious, but like dominating than what Jalen Brunson did on Andrew Nembhard, in part because Nembhard's a better defender and all that type of stuff last year. And so I think Shai knows whenever DiVincenzo's on him that he's going to be able to get something, whether it's a drawn foul or to get to his shot and work his way to his spot. And so I really like that, even though it isn't the Thunder's dominant strategy right now, that they're going to it in the right spots to exploit a mismatch. And it's going to lead to Chris Finch just having to make a decision. And DiVincenzo, he comes off the bench, but he's still an important part of the Wolves rotation. Nate, I'm not hearing you.
Joe only played 3 minutes, but Lou Dort also was used in a lot of those actions. Now, Lou Dort, he's not necessarily going to slip out of it, but he's going to set a brick wall screen to try to get the switch. The other thing that Shai is so good at is coming off of that screen and then basically just pivoting around the screener like a lamp pole, splitting the pick and roll, even if they're not in like a really, and they'll do this against the zone too, even if they're not in, a hard blitz type of situation. And so, yeah, he was just unstoppable. I mean, I don't know that he's going to shoot this well every single time, but the free throw line was a big problem for the Wolves too. And they just that's the thing you got to at least give him a chance to miss, which they didn't. A lot of his shots that he can miss ended up just plays where he went to the foul line instead. And then, yeah, he had 8 assists and started off a lot of other plays too. And the Thunder haven't even shot well yet. They're 9 out of 33 from 3. And that's a big concern as well. So I didn't expect the Wolves to be able to score well against OKC. Julius Randle had an absolute nightmare. And he really has got nothing going at the rim. He had that hot shooting first half in game 1, but since then he's really struggled. He had a further 4 turnovers as well. I thought the Wolves, this is about as good as the Wolves can do taking care of the ball, but they got really, every time it looked like they might be able to come back a little bit in the fourth quarter, they would just have another turnover for a quick pick 6. So, yeah, it's got to definitely be disheartening for Minnesota that, I mean, they just haven't even come close to solving job 1, which is stopping Shai. Like if you don't stop Shai, particularly because their offense isn't such a great matchup against this Thunder defense, which I think we're starting to understand how good the Nuggets actually were and how good Nikola Jokic actually is. Now that we see the Thunder against another team, but Yeah, I mean, I think that they're kind of at a loss. I don't know what they can do against Shea. Maybe we can brainstorm on it a little bit here.
Well, before we get all the way there, just to make sure that we have it out there for the pod. So the Thunder did miss a bunch of threes in this game. They're 9 of 33 overall. They haven't shot well in this series, but they were ridiculous on twos outside the restricted area, especially the first half. So in the first half, the Thunder were 14 of 19 on twos away from the basket outside the restricted area, and some of that might be a little bit of logging. And then overall for the game, they were 20 of 36, which is also still really, really good. And so, how those two things interplay, they missed a lot of open threes, but they made a lot of floaters, which weren't always contested, but they're just not shots that everyone takes, that everyone makes. So, I'm interested in how that works out. But yeah, workshopping on how to defend Shea. What that doesn't include Anthony Edwards spending more time on him because I just don't think he can burn the candle at both ends for long enough to make that
Yeah,
a
but
viable
maybe in
strategy.
crunch time. But they got to actually get to crunch time first.
Exactly. And so I think we'll probably see more blitzing, but that will though lead to the Thunder getting good looks. Those players could miss it, a la Minnesota in game one. But and maybe that is a better strategy than just getting carved up, possibly. I generally am not the biggest fan of blitzing and doubling, but if it is, we've seen some of the alternatives so far.
Yeah, and maybe at home they'll have more energy. I thought again the Thunder just largely played harder than the Wolves. There was one stretch briefly where the Thunder didn't get back once or twice, and another time when people didn't run down with Shea on the offensive end, and Mark Daigneault immediately took a timeout, and then they were able to right the ship on that. And yeah, Shea's shooting it amazingly well. But then the other guy who really got going was Jalen Williams, 10 of 14 from two for
Mhm.
him. And I thought he was also good on the glass. And really, him attacking the zone was one of the biggest reasons why that didn't work particularly well either, because you do have to kind of put two guys on the ball with Shea if they're going to set a screen. I think the Nugget series was great practice for the Oklahoma City Thunder going up against that zone, and they looked very, very comfortable on how they wanted to attack it, and particularly since Jada was hitting his threes, but then also was getting to his spots. I thought he actually was one of his more physical driving games, which is an
Mhm.
area of his game that he needs to work on more, in addition to the blinding speed moves. So he was fantastic. This is one of his best playoff games with 26 points on 12 of 20 from the field. And he also, of course, was excellent defensively as well. He's been the main matchup against Randall on a lot of these possessions, even with the two bigs. And he also makes a lot of those lineups go when they only have the one big out there.
Something else when the Thunder have the ball that has to be concerning to Minnesota is that the Oklahoma City Thunder actually had more second chance points than them in game two. And it was close. It was 14-12, but that's supposed to be a big competitive advantage for Minnesota. And it's not that the Thunder, Minnesota had a 33% offensive rebound rate, Thunder were at 29. They were just better at converting those. But the competitive advantages that Minnesota has in the series, it's not just, you need to fight them to a draw. You need to dominate in those elements. And especially when you consider the overall possession game, because it's extremely hard, especially for anybody, but especially this Minnesota Timberwolves team, to be fine in the turnover game. And so in turnovers, this one, and I thought Minnesota did a better job overall. 14 turnovers for Minnesota, if you prefer turnover rate, 15% in game two when it was 20% in game one. But that still led to a 22-10 points off turnovers differential. And so if you get, as the Thunder, not all of those are transition, not all of those are live ball, though 9 of those 14 turnovers for Minnesota were live ball, then that it just gives the Thunder another place to have an advantage. And I mean, so this one, I didn't even necessarily think they needed that. Both teams were reasonably efficient in transition, but at a relatively low frequency. But if the Thunder are beating you in the possession game, which they usually do, maybe not on the glass, and they're efficient in the half court, they're an exceedingly hard team to beat.
Only 6 turnovers
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
Shea with one turnover. I mean, that's just Chet was the only guy with multiple turnovers.
Well, and Nate, on top of
And
that, only 2 of them were live ball. But
yeah,
you
it's
can't get
incredible.
much out of that.
Yeah. So how many fast break points did the Wolves have in this one? They actually were credited with
9.
9 after 0 in the first game. But yeah, that's not going to get it done. If they're not going to get their own feedback loops, it becomes a lot more difficult. And you just wonder, like, one of the big things for the Wolves is like, yeah, we're open. We got to make shots. They're 11 to 39 from three. Started off well, like they had moments, particularly early in the second, when the bench was going well, when they had Alexander Walker and DiVincenzo hitting some threes. If Naz Reid could not just be 0 for 5 and he's a good shooter, and Edwards could find his three ball, he was 1 for 9. You could say maybe they're kind of in it, but this is about so much more than the shooting, particularly because the Thunder didn't shoot well from three. Although, again, as you noted, they did for mid range. But so, like the turnover game, and then just the efficiency of Shai, they're it seems like, yeah, if things go right for the Wolves, they can be close, but you're also struggling to figure out how the Wolves can get well over the hump in a particular game, because as we noted, the Thunder haven't shot very well in these games either. And so they have some more upside to possibly explore. And to go 9 of 33 from downtown and still put up a buck 18 was very comfortable for them. They really just felt in control most of the way in this one. I want to shout out Lou Dort as well. I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
he had, to me, his best game that I've seen from him as a help defender. And that was impressive, especially considering who he's guarding. But it's also very useful that basically anyone can switch on to Ant, and it's not a huge issue. And they're willing to play a drop coverage on Ant when they have the bigs in. Ant hasn't been able to make them pay on that with the three ball off the dribble. I think that's something that the Wolves should try to explore a little bit more, particularly when Gobert is out there. But Dort made all these plays. He had this amazing strip of Randall where he just hammered the ball out of his hands after they lobbed it to Randall in the post. Randall was getting very frustrated, just couldn't get the ball. Caruso got a few fouls just denying him the ball. I think there was one on Wallace too, but like that's what the Thunder do. Like they'll commit these fouls. These are non-shooting fouls, and now you're not going to get the ball and you're going to be frustrated. And then everyone starts throwing these high-risk passes to even get it into the guy because you feel this pressure that he hasn't gotten shots, and there's good pressure on the passer. There's one play where 3 guys just executed it perfectly. I think it was Caruso fronting Randall. Then you had great passer or pressure on the passer who was DiVincenzo. So he had to just he got stood up and had to kind of lob it over. And then Shai came over from the backside and got the steal. He came all the way from the lane because the pass had to be lobbed due to the pressure in the front. And that's just a perfect example of how well the Thunder work on a string, those 3 guys to get that steal. And they do that all the time.
And one of the other real strengths of the Thunder defense was protecting the rim. And so overall, Minnesota was 12 of 22 in the restricted area. Randall was 0 for 4. Edwards was 5 for 9. The Thunder had only 3 blocks, but had a lot of good contests in there. Of course, forced those turnovers like the one you mentioned with Lou Dort on Randall. He was trying to do post up, but they were able to make that one. It wasn't the catch; it was after the catch, but they were able to do really good work there. And the Wolves don't really. I mean, not if Naz Reid was hitting shots, maybe you could get a little bit more of like getting those guys out of position. But the Thunder, they're generally going to concede other things in order to make sure that they're doing a nice job around the basket. And Minnesota did get free throws, but a fair portion of that was in the less competitive portion of the game. They had 26 free throw attempts, but all but one of those were in the second half, and about half of them were in the fourth quarter. So how much you want to read into like the Wolves having a productive third in terms of getting to the line, but they still, got beat 35-21 in the third quarter. So Minnesota, it is was one of the questions we had going in was like, can they generate good looks for anybody? I mean, they could generate corner threes, but and they could go in at a higher rate than in this one. At least was slightly better, but they were still 4 of 15, so that's still worse than you would want it to be. But they don't have that many other things to hang their hat on, and maybe that can be Ant pull up threes. I agree with you that that's something that Chris Finch and Edwards should explore. But outside of that, it's hard. I mean, they were 10-19, and I think some of this is logging stuff too from in the upper paint. But Minnesota, I brought up what OKC's, their offense rating. Minnesota half court offensive rating 94.5, overall 109.6. And I think that the Wolves defense is the bigger concern, but their offense is a big enough concern that if they, and maybe the feedback loops would be enough, but there's enough there to be concerned about too.
Yeah, and Ant has been making the right play when they load up on him. How many corner threes did they shoot today?
15, 4 of 15.
Yeah, and that's just it right there. They're 5 of 21 in the first game. If they just make those corner threes, and I thought if anything, those were more open in this game. But that's just a huge rate of corner threes, and they did get to the basket more, but as you noted, they really struggled to finish it. And Gobert couldn't do anything on offense, couldn't do anything on the offensive glass. He had a couple, but nothing that was going to make them all scared to go small against him. And then that, of course, makes things a lot more difficult. So really, on the defensive end, the Thunder are taking away just about everything except for the corner three. And also they're forcing a lot of turnovers through those plays. Like they didn't really seem to do anything much different defensively. They did go a little bit of 1-2-2 zone, particularly when they went small. They only went small without either Chet or Hartenstein. They only did that for a minute 27. They went actually Jalen Williams at center. They played Kenrich, but they didn't play him in the small ball unit. He only played a minute 30 as well. And so they went with both of the bigs. There wasn't any foul trouble there either. And but they still were able to get really good shots. I mean, another sign of the health of the Thunder offense. 12 assisted baskets at the rim. That's a very solid number compared to 6 for Minnesota, which was up actually from last game. 30 assists for the Thunder. And when you have Shai going off for an incredibly efficient 38 points, and then they also are getting 30 assists, and getting 30 assists on a night when they only made 9 threes, because threes are the easiest place to get assists on. That's just shows you how far Minnesota has to go defensively.
And I don't. So the hard thing for me with this is I brought this up after game one. That to me, the result of that one, which was to me was closer than here, was I felt like Minnesota could absolutely win games in the series, but that the Thunder, I felt more confident that Oklahoma City would eventually win the series than because the big pitfalls that could have theoretically presented themselves, the fun of a new series every time, that those didn't happen. This result to me, I don't think it's like definitively a sweep or anything, but I think that this was an indicator that the talent level is so significant that the true outcome is like Minnesota, I think they can win games, but I think it'll probably be close. Maybe they could get an avalanche at one point and just kind of knock it a little bit out of the park. But my instinct is that the Thunder can win games in blowouts, and they can potentially win games close, and the Wolves can win close. And there were, of course, elements of that in the Denver series, but Denver had different personnel. Denver was able to execute some things differently. So I'm now more confident than I was before I picked the series in 6 that it could be a short series.
Now, one good thing at least was that Anthony Edwards got going 11 to 17 from 2. A lot of that again came in the second half, but and he drew 6 fouls. So he started to at least do something. The real reason he had a rough night was just because he was, and he also didn't have any turnovers.
Right.
So the real reason only reason he had a rough night was just the 1 of 9 from 3, and I wouldn't even characterize it necessarily as a rough night either. So that's something that they can take heart from. But he also, like, they scored a buck 3 in the game, and that he wasn't doing anything to make OKC change things up. And I thought he did a pretty good job of setting up his teammates and setting up corner threes and throwing passes to the weak side. Like like he played as well as you could expect him to play against this defense. But they need to get something else from Randall. And I think, to me, what that probably is would be trying to have him handle it in pick and roll and go at Shai, and then have that guy pop and maybe get a pick and pop there or a drive against a closeout. That would be my thought on how to deal with it, or even just set him some screens to get into the post a little bit so that they can't front him and make it so hard. Like I thought they did a nice job of getting Ant the ball closer to the basket, like we talked about. And he actually showed the ability to back down a little bit on his man, force help, and then he has an easier passing angle. He's also just not going a million miles an hour, so he can make the pass more easily. So I thought that was good. I want to see a little bit more of that type of stuff as well. And they could try sprinting back on defense. What were the off miss transition numbers for the Thunder in this game? I thought they looked pretty good in that respect.
Incidentally, both teams had scored 1.75 points per transition play off live rebounds.
How often do they run?
OKC's transition frequency was low,
Yeah.
12.1%. Minnesota's was 21.4.
Okay. Well, that's why we have the stats, because sometimes the eyes doth deceive us. And like they've gotten little pockets, right? Like Alexander Walker played well. Jaden McDaniels also was a second scorer. He's not a second playmaker, but he's a second scorer, and he looked very confident taking his three, even including above the break. They played around slightly with him at power forward, and Naz Reid at center. Randall didn't even play in the fourth. That was a group they went to. Only 6 minutes for McDaniels at power forward, but I don't think that's their strongest group, because they got to win this with size. If you're just going to try to downsize and like play DiVincenzo and Alexander Walker at the three, like you're just going to be too small. Shai's going to have too many guys to go after. I thought they didn't do a very good job of going after Shai again in this one. And Mike Conley also really struggled again from the outside. I thought he had some moments of at least creating good shots in game one. We didn't really see that in this game. He only had 3 points in 28 minutes, which is just not going to cut it at all, even if he does provide a steadying influence. And I thought he did everything he could defensively, but on some of those, he's just too small to say, stop Jalen Williams with the head of steam going to the basket. And Gobert just not able to do anything on the offensive end. Like he's just got to play better defensively. There are a lot of plays. Like I don't know if he got frustrated or what. Like he was getting good contests on Hartenstein, and Hartenstein was just making the floater again. But then there are other times where guys, especially when he was in the zone, would get it towards the middle, and they're like, "Yeah, Alex Caruso will let you shoot it." But there are other times when guys were closer in floater range, and he just was there and didn't really get a hand up. Maybe he's worried about committing a foul or something. But like he just needs to play more aggressively, I would say, on defense.
I agree. And so there are definitely more improvements that the Wolves can make. They had some guys step up in game two, but they need more. And the home crowd could potentially help with that. But another thing that Oklahoma City did well, and this is kind of takes away a potential counter that Minnesota can go to, is I thought Thunder did a much better job this time around attacking the basket when Rudy Gobert was off the floor. And Gobert, I think that he could play better defensively, but I still think that he's a difference maker for them on that end. It's natural to kind of focus sometimes on his shortcomings, and he has plenty of them, of course, on the offensive end too. But Oklahoma City understood better this time that if you get downhill and Rudy Gobert's not on the floor, this Minnesota team just doesn't have a lot of rim protection. I was going to say supplemental, but they don't have supplemental or primary. And understanding that they can get some of those drives, that stuff can work better, and that can become more of a way that the Thunder can generate good shots in a game where they're not hitting all of their twos away from the basket.
One comment here. I think the Nuggets are incredible clutching. I wouldn't say that makes them meaningful better than this Minnesota team. I was talking really on offense, that the Nuggets had moments where they looked pretty good on offense, and that they made OKC do things they didn't want to do, like just release Jamal Murray downhill because Nikola Jokic just has to be stuck to in the pick and roll. And Jokic had a 44-point game against them. And I thought for games 4 through 6, he actually looked very comfortable, and Denver scored pretty well in those. So that's what I would say about that. I don't know that Denver is a better team than the Wolves. I think if the Wolves played Denver, I might have picked the Wolves. But I think in this matchup, OKC just looks very comfortable. Also, really, you have to say too that Denver sharpened OKC, right? Like the
Mhm.
zone that they had to go through against Denver. I mean, you'll see this a lot of times, honestly, where a team will struggle a lot unexpectedly in some eyes in the second round, and then they really go on to handle their business in the next couple of rounds, just in a different matchup or because they managed to address their flaws the first time that they're challenged, and then they can have a much better basis when they're attacked in the same way going forward. I think that's part of why OKC has been playing so well right now.
Anything else for you on this one?
I don't think so. I think I threw out most of what I had there. I think the biggest thing is just the play better adjustment from Minnesota and like make some fucking corner threes. Like you're a good corner 3-point shooting team. Like these are Nasri, these are pretty open shots by a lot of these guys. Like they're just gonna have to make them, and then maybe we'll have ourselves a ball game. But ultimately, their offense is just a little bit too station to station. And then fine if you're gonna take Gobert off the floor, then you're gonna have Randall and Naz Reid trying to protect the rim with the Shea out there. And like if Shea's going to score pretty well on McDaniels, or fine, he can go at Randall very easily. That's something that Golden State never really had a chance to do. And because the Lakers guys were a little bit slower, Randall could actually handle them on switches. And frankly, the Lakers just don't like attack switches hard. They just get the switch and then Luca backs up 20 feet and tries to go at the guy, as opposed to just like, and Randall, once he can square up and get in a stance, he's fine. If you get him out in space having to react to a quick move the way Shea has been doing it to him, that's been a real problem. So the Wolves just have a lot of matchups that they can't deal with, and Gobert hurts their offense and hasn't been good enough defensively to make up for that either. And that's the biggest thing that I really have a lot of concern with is I thought they could cause problems more than Denver did, frankly, for this Thunder offense, and that just hasn't been the case. What did we think of the Wolves' bigger lineups? I don't know how many times they've played McDaniels, Nas, Reed, and Gobert all together. Can this still be a Randall series? It has to be. It has to be. They don't really have like he's probably their best passer, or certainly their second best passer. They have to create some advantages because Conley is a good passer, but he can't create the advantage initially. So they got to figure out a way with Randall, but that's again like his defensive limitations are starting to come to the fore. I don't know with Carl Towns, would it be better just because he's a better shooter? I don't know, like, but he also would probably, and he provides more rim protection than Randall, so maybe he would generally make things harder around the basket or get some offensive rebounds or something like that. But yeah, it's Randall's just gonna have to play better. But this is a great defense. I don't know that he is that good going up against a team like this. Dylan Harper?
Let's do it. And Dylan Harper, somebody that has been on, not necessarily has been on radars for a while, son of Ron Harper, brother of Ron Harper Jr., was highly regarded in the recruiting services, 5-star, number 2, number 3, and all the major services. Chose to go to Rutgers in New Jersey over many other options. And I think the place that I want to start with Dylan Harper, just to set the tone a little bit for those who are less familiar, a lot of people who watch this show are more NBA people than college or high school, is Dylan Harper's measurements. And so thankfully, everybody gets measured at the combine now. So we actually have we have these things definitively. Dylan Harper, 6'4.5" without shoes, 213 pounds, 6'10" and a half wingspan, 8'6" standing reach. And if you want to know kind of who's that's like, combine measurement to combine measurement, the two guys who kind of stood out, I looked through historically, Josh Green, that's former Maverick, current Hornet Josh Green. And he's actually a little bit heavier, but pretty similar measurements to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who we just talked about a little bit. And so if that sounds interesting for an on-ball guy, it is, because Ron Harper is straight up 2-guard sized, and with his weight, we'll see what he can do there. But when you just think about that when we're talking about the rest of his game.
Yeah, Dylan Harper. Ron Harper also was straight up 2-guard size, but
That's all true.
Yeah. So physical profile is the very interesting part because this guy is a point guard. We'll spoil it a little bit. He has a point guard handle, point guard vision, and so yeah, he is 2-guard size. as pretty good wingspan. Not a like great wingspan as far as contesting
Mhm.
necessarily, but he's strong and he's physically actually has lost some weight. But when he gets a shoulder by a guy, you're just not getting around him. And we saw him at the hoops on it too. Like anytime he would get some kind of a steam in transition, you just couldn't stay in front of him. He would just bully whoever was in front of him. You put a guy on him who's smarter than him, he's just going to beat that guy because he does have pretty good footwork, pretty good moves. He's good out of triple threat, pretty good first step, and then he can really get into the lane and go slow enough using his strength to get to the spots that he wants to get to because he's so strong he can be under control. Not a great leaper. He had 12 dunks on the year. He can get up off of 1 foot. Okay. He's like barely able to dunk off of vert. So that he's not going to just come in and like dunk on people in transition for his size. I would consider him a solid athlete as a vertical guy. He does have a little bit of a nice second jump. You see that maybe more on defense, and he can react pretty quickly. He's got pretty quick hands when he is engaged and involved in the play. And in a straight line, he's again like solid, and he can change speeds a little bit. I think his short area quickness is pretty good. I don't think any of these athletic markers, other than the size and strength for his position, are blow you away. But with that size and strength, they're adequate, and in some cases, more so, more than adequate.
Yeah, and something that I appreciate about Dylan Harper is that the pieces of his game fit together pretty well. There's plenty of room for improvement, of course, but I like him better as a straight line athlete than a side to side athlete. Well, he's better as a straight line driver than side to side too. And so it fits together there. He's good at strength. So if he gets the shoulder pass, then he could use that to his advantage. And so maybe that is Harper understanding where his advantages lie and building his game within that. Maybe it's a nice like confluence of factors. I don't know that for sure, but I think it makes it easier, not perfect, but easier to kind of see how this could work at the next level, which is very different than the competition he faced at Rutgers.
So the thing that impressed me the most about him would be his handle at his size. Very reactive handle. He's got tight spin moves between the legs at speed, which is a difficult move to do. Like John Morant does that as well. If he's splitting the pick and roll, he can do that because he can change the tempo of his dribble. And it's just one of the best handles you're ever going to see on a guy this size. And so, again, given his strength and pretty decent acceleration, that's where you start to get a pretty intriguing player. And as far as beating guys one on one, he's not necessarily going to blow by in a straight line. But if he gets cut off once, then he can change directions. And then using a screen, he's just really difficult to deal with. Like teams generally just doubled him off the pick
Mhm.
and roll because if he got it in the lane, he could operate, he could get his man in jail, make plays out of that. So they were just much more interested in forcing the ball to these sorry bigs that they had on the move rather than letting Dylan Harper beat them. He's also very good in transition, pushing the ball. So that to me is the handle at this size. Like I would consider his handle to be above average for a point guard. And again, when you consider how big he is, that's probably the number one thing that stood out to me as something that's rare in this type of prospect.
It is, and we'll talk about comparisons later on. He invokes a couple of different guys for me, and that is part of it. I may be a little bit lower just because he doesn't always lose guys in kind of sort of that traditional sense of like you think about a guy like Shai or Kyrie or somebody else like what they do, but he is able to cultivate an advantage, and for his size, of course, that makes other ways to do it. And I think that one of the like what you were talking about in terms of using a screen versus not, that's really borne out in the stats. And so as synergy classifies possessions. Dylan Harper, about 50th percentile, 50th to 55th in isolation, points per possession, with or passes included or not, and 55th percentile. I think it was 55th. In it's 50/50 in transition. And so like when he has a screen, but then when he has a screen, that ratchets up a lot. So 82nd percentile, a little bit under a point per possession as a pick and roll scorer out of pick and roll ball handler, and then when you include passes, that ratchets up over 1 point per possession. And so you see that on the film. Like I saw it on the film, and then I saw the stats, and it makes sense when you think about what Harper's game is, but it's also something that's really encouraging to me. I had two kind of favorite things about him beyond the stuff that you already said. One of which is his mentality and some of the stuff with passing, but the other one is that the which ties in is the maturity in his game. Like he does a better job setting up screens for a teenager than you see most guys, and especially guys who are his size.
Yeah, he just knows how to play.
Yep.
And that's something that stood out to me at the Hoop Summit as well. Because the first time he walked in at the Hoop Summit, I was like, "Hey, this guy's shooting his jumper. It's kind of flat. Like, what's to really like about this guy? He kind of looks like he's a shooting guard or a small forward." But then you see him get into the actual game and some of the stuff that he could do in transition and playing pick and roll. You're like, okay, now I get it, and I get how physical he is, and that's a big part of it too. But yeah, he just knows how to play. Like I would say his passing, we talk about that next. It's not at the absolute top level of some of the point guard prospects that we've seen, but I think it's in that next group down. And again, given his size, that's a very nice compliment to give because he can see over the top of the defense, no problems hitting the roll man if he's double teamed, no problems hitting guys on skip passes. If he catches the ball on a broken floor, able to find the right pass, either a hit ahead or the one more to the guy cutting down the lane pretty well. And then if he does get into the lane, he's able to make some really nice passes. He had a couple of plays where he just snuck it between two guys to the big for a dunk, or should have been a dunk, depending on which big man he was throwing it to. But where he's like, oh, how did he find that angle? It was very impressive. And because he plays relatively under control, that helps all of that as well. So I think he has a relatively unselfish attitude. He would start a lot of games getting others involved, and then he would really go into scoring mode sometimes in the second half if they weren't getting blown out on this bad team that he was on.
So I'm kind of thinking now about passing in three different components. So one of them is vision. What do you see? Who do you see? Who do you not see? The second one is mentality. What passes do you want to make? What passes do you turn off? And then the other one is, I'll use J. Kyle Mann's term of passing vocabulary. It's you see it, you want to do it. Do you make the right pass to get it there? And Dylan Harper is pretty strong in all three of those. Like you, I don't think that he's elite in any of them, but
Yeah. There would be a few plays where the guy would pop open and it would take him maybe a half second to throw the pass on a backdoor. But it was rare that he wouldn't find the guy. He would just be like slightly late on occasion.
Exactly. And so this is high praise. Like these are more like in the smaller level of complaints, but he's not preternatural the way that, like as much as we don't love the rest of his game all the time, Josh Giddey is, or some of the other great passers at various sizes, LeBron and Harden and everything else. But he's still very, very good. And considering that Harper, he's born in March 2006, so his rookie year will be his age 19 season. I'm so thankful. That was one of the other weird elements of the 24 draft was not only were these guys worse, but they were older. Like even there were these old freshmen. This class, these guys are young. I mean, we haven't talked about Cooper Flag yet. He's exceedingly young. But Harper, for where he is in his age and where he is in the development process, I love his mentality. Like he wanted to make the passes, and that what excites me a lot about Harper, and we'll talk about this later on. I mean, we don't know exactly where he's going to go, but this seems like a decent idea, is what he can do on a team that has both better spacing, ideally better offensive coaching, and better offensive talent. And so, because he's a good, willing passer and he can get downhill, well, that's going to look a lot better if there aren't like three guys at the paint because there are a couple guys who can't shoot, or all these other limitations that Rutgers had. And so part of what you and I are trying to do, because we're looking at these players entirely through an NBA lens, is we have to kind of filter out and the stuff that will be the same and the stuff that won't be the same. And for me with Harper, that made me feel even better about him.
Yeah, you mentioned the passing vocabulary. He's really good at throwing passes with his right hand. He's got one of the better right hands that you'll see from a guy who's an obvious lefty, not one of these Ben Simmons, Mike Conley types, but someone who actually is like pretty clearly a lefty. He's worked on his right hand and he's also pretty good at finishing there as well. And that's probably the next thing to talk about is his finishing. He can get out of control sometimes. Like I think he needs to work a little bit on his decel moves. He flashed it at times, right? And that bump Euro step move is something that can be very powerful for him. Get better at using the ubiquitous off arm,
Oh
sadly.
boy.
Like he doesn't even use that much, but he's so strong with his shoulders that it doesn't even matter. And then he'll try to go for some of these scoop shots underneath guys' arms where he's a little out of control and just slams it off the backboard, or other times he would just try to throw his body into guys. He did get to the foul line quite a bit, almost 6 attempts per game. It was a big number for a college player. But there are a few moments where he didn't have great craft, didn't show an awesome floater game. Like that's, I would say, is one of my concerns about him is the ability to score in the dotted line area because he
Mhm.
also, we'll talk about his jumper in a second. That's not really a great weapon from that area either, I would say. So the floater, particularly because he's so strong, that sort of Euro step floater from 8 feet away is a shot he's going to have to get because he's also like he can finish reasonably well, but he's not going to be able to just go right into an NBA big and score on it. Like he doesn't have that Ja Morant type of I'm going to just go score on anybody athleticism, but he certainly can get to the spots that he wants to get to on the floor pretty regularly. And again, a lot of his finishing is more about power, using his shoulders, getting an angle. It's not necessarily a vertical finishing game, but because he can use either hand, that definitely helps. So I wouldn't say his touch is elite either, as particularly in more of a half court type of setting. Let's talk about his shooting from the outside.
Well, that's not as strong a part of Dylan Harper's resume right now. So the overall Harper shot 33% on 5.7 threes per 36 minutes. Did make 75% of his free throws. In 6.5 free throws per 36 free throw attempts per 36 minutes. And so when you split that out, and this is something I like to do. So on catch and shoot threes, Harper took 57, made 37% of those. That's a good number, but it's not like superlative or anything like that. But then the pull up was largely a disaster. 96, so way more than the catch and shoot. And he only made 29% of those. And the mechanics on that don't look great. There were a few where it's like, oh my God, he hits that one. It looks really exciting. He had a couple go ahead shots that were big. And what concerned me from the shooting standpoint was I'm like, okay, saw the number, and then I watched a lot of this. I don't know if I watched all 57, but I watched pretty close to that, and I didn't like the film. Like
This is the catch and shoot or the off the dribble?
the catch and shoot. I mean, the off the
Yeah.
dribble footage is terrible, but the
Okay.
catch and shoot, like something that you like to see, especially when the numbers are good, is like, okay, he missed them, but the misses weren't that bad. They were close, and the makes were good. There was like one catch and shoot where like it barely hit rim despite no pressure. There were and there was a weird thing where there was a segment like as you're watching these all in rhythm where the rushed ones looked better than the slow one or like that sort of stuff, but generally that wasn't true. And so like when I watched watching all of it in sequence, I actually was a little worried that that 37% number for right now, players improve, players develop in time, that kind of overstated his catch and shoot shooting talent maybe a little bit. But I don't think that it's fundamentally like broken. I think there are improvements that the coaching staff can and will make. And when you consider how developed the rest of Harper's game is, there's a clear impetus for this to be the next thing that he really, really works on. But considering how foundational jump shooting is, and ideally a pull-up shot, but as I said, I thought the footage on that was really bad. I would feel so much more confident in him as like a absolute, no doubt about it star if that jumper was meaningfully better.
Yeah, there's a chance it's going to be a problem. I think he's probably going to need some surgery on it. He shoots it off of his nose or a little bit off of his shoulder, but definitely like out in front of his body, and he shoots it out. Doesn't have a ton of arc. And
Mhm.
like you said, he made the free throws reasonably well, but it's a shot form that is not particularly conducive to backing it out further to the NBA line in particular because he's just launching it from a low angle and he's not getting underneath the ball and he's not it's much harder to get your legs into it as well when you're shooting out in front of your body in that way. And not to mention the fact that it could easily be blocked. That's going to negate a lot of his height advantage, which would be getting to smaller players and knocking them backwards and scoring from the mid range. Like that's like he can still shoot a jump shot. Like it's not so messed up that he can't do that. And he can shoot going to his left. Like given how bad his form is,
Yeah.
like, I don't think his right thumb is involved too much or anything like that. Like, but given how bad his form is, like he has more versatility to the shot than you would expect, and he wasn't hesitant to take it, and that gives me some more hope for it as well. But I would be very surprised if you're looking at film from him 4 years from now and he's a good shooter and he's shooting the same way. Like I think he's really going to need to make some improvements there, and I think he still is never going to be a great shooter. So I'm pleased at least that he's willing to take them, and if the defense would go under, he would shoot that shot. So I don't think that it can't get better, but it's not good enough right now. And I think it's, there's certainly plenty of point guards who've been drafted high who've had a worse jumper. Although I
Mhm.
don't know how many of them have had worse form necessarily than he does. And particularly because it's a twofold problem. One is just that it's not as likely to go in the way he shoots it, but number two is just it's a low release. And not only is it a low release in the sense that it's hard to make it to get your body underneath it and shoot it up, but then also it can be contested pretty well. And one thing that I would wonder now, this is a good thing already if you're a point guard to make that you're good enough that you have to be guarded by a wing player. But if he's going up against a wing player, can he get his shot off against someone who's his size or bigger? That's one of the big concerns that I would have about him.
I'm really happy you brought up the low release point. It's one of my big concerns about Harper, and I think that there are ways with shooting form and development that can improve. And like you, without some form of surgery on, especially the pull up jumper, I think that will be a real limitation. And so I think that kind of has that, as I said, for him to be like a true star, all that type of stuff. And it is possible, especially I talked about the parts of Harper's game that I like in terms of using his strength, that playing a bigger guy on him is a good strategy, especially at the beginning, but maybe eventually as well. But if Harper, as you said, is good enough to warrant that special attention, that's going to open things up for teammates and everything else. But I also think that Harper coming into the league when he is the spacing in the modern NBA is going to help him, but the more consistent approach by coaches to just there was this idea for a long time of like, putting your point guard on the other team's point guard or all that kind of stuff. Like teams never use their primary creator in the matchup defensively against the other team's primary creator. So you're going to see a lot more guys that either have length, strength, or both in that matchup, if that's the role that Dylan Harper earns in the NBA. And I think it will be in time. Um, Not that we're getting all the way into player comparisons, but I thought this one was potentially useful in this specific element. So I'll just say it outright right now. The guy and it's not because the left-handed part of it. The guy who I thought about a lot, and it's before the Dunc'd era, that Dylan Harper reminded me the most of was James Harden, high school, college James Harden, not what he became and everything else. It's so hard when you're comparing a player to someone who's such an established commodity. And it's the feel, it's the passing, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that Harden was so much better, and I loved Harden when he was in high school at Artesia. I was pissed off UCLA didn't recruit him. Then I loved him at Arizona State. Was that he was a much better shooter in those stages than Dylan Harper is now. And Harden, I looked it up. Synergy luckily has this 42% on catch and shoot threes his sophomore year at Arizona State. Like, and as I remember it, watching it as a kid who just graduated college at the time, I felt a lot more confident in his shot. But So that's what I'm talking about in terms of Harper not being there. Is he needs to get quite that level. I will note in passing, James Harden only took 33 pull-up threes that entire sophomore season. It's just how the league has changed. So how the whole sport has changed since that point in, was that 2008? Yeah, I think it was 08.
Yeah, 09 would have been his sophomore season.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and Harden also bigger wingspan, like he could cock it back for some big dunks. Harper doesn't have that uh, in his game necessarily, but I would say kind of a similar level of speed off the drill. But yeah, I'd say even Harden could be a little bit faster and a little bit better a stop and start. But again, I didn't scout him in college. We got some more comps to get to on
Oh
him
yeah.
too. Let's talk about the defensive end of the floor.
There's a lot of intrigue, even if the intrigue doesn't become something all of the time with Harper. So he has this positional size. He, being 6'4.5" without shoes, having an 8'6" standing reach. He doesn't have to, be a wallflower once. And I like that Harper, watching the defensive film, I thought that he competes more than the average on-ball star. He isn't perfect, but like he moves his feet. I wish he changed changed ends of the floor better. But we've seen so many of these guys over the years. I mean, whether we want to say Markelle Fultz, or I mean, where the defensive film was an abomination. Dylan Harper is a lot better than that. And even though I don't think he's ever going to be a defensive force, in part because of the offensive role, but in part just his physical tools aren't quite at that level, I think he'll be able to hold his own. And I think he'll have more positional versatility if he's good enough on offense that he's guarding the weaker offensive counterpart. So if he's, I don't think that he's going to guard star threes, but I think he can guard threes that are the weakest offensive player of the team's point guard, shooting guard, and small forward.
Yeah, he does have good strength, and yeah, when I thought it was kind of an interesting journey for me because a lot of times I'll watch all the guys' blocks and steals to just try to get a feel for what kind of playmaking skills they have. And watching that with Harper, I was like, oh, it's actually pretty good. He doesn't have great hands defensively reaching in, but a lot of times he would react quickly with his hands to a pass that was in his area, get a deflection, or he could move in the passing lane, anticipate a pass and get a steal. If he did get engaged, he could maybe go for a block from behind. And so I was like, oh, this isn't bad. And he's shown some good anticipation here. And then all the games that I watched, he just did nothing. He did
Yep.
absolutely nothing. He just, I mean, it was he and Ace Bailey both just kind of stood on the perimeter most of the way, unless the action was going right at him. And I was hoping, especially given how smart he was, that he could be like a pretty good nail help defender. And I think that he will be that. I think that he just wasn't asked to do that. The situation was a really weird and somewhat hopeless one. And I've also seen him at the Hoop Summit. He was guarding a guy, Trent Perry, who went to UCLA this year. Bill Simmons was talking him up because he went to Harvard Westlake, where I think is where Bill Simmons' son went last year. And Trent Perry came in on the Portland Generals and just went crazy in the first quarter of the game. It probably had like 15 points. And Dylan Harper just was like, all right, you're just not doing that anymore. This is in an all-star setting. And Dylan Harper just completely erased him from the game. So I do think he has that mentality and just generally a winning mentality. That's why it was so incongruous to see him on this bullshit Rutgers team. And because he just is so much smarter than all the other guys. He would be telling everyone where to go, even though he was a freshman, and there's just no one else with a brain on the team. And his bigs couldn't do anything. And Ace Bailey, I think Ace is going to be better in the NBA in terms of his basketball IQ than what he showed at times at Rutgers. But he's no Dylan Harper either. And so Harper really knows what he's doing. And I think for whatever reason, not getting foul trouble or not being or not wanting to get fouls or not being held accountable or whatever, most of the time he just kind of stood there. And I think there's enough there, especially given his strength and intelligence and quick hands, that I think he can be a quality asset. I thought when he did try to get over screens, he could look pretty good there. He could close down space. His length is not elite. Guys can definitely shoot over him to some degree. And in the post too, he wasn't one of these guys who's like, "Oh, I'm a strong guy. You try to go at me, I'm gonna be impossible to post up." He would kind of bite on some fakes every now and then. That it didn't look as awesome as I was kind of hoping, and I think that's going to be important. But you could do a lot worse as your worst defender. That's part of the privilege of having a guy this size and strength as your lead ball handler, is that you can construct a team in which he's your worst defender. And if he's your worst defender, you're going to have a pretty good defense in almost all likelihood. Because I do think he has a lot of intelligence. And yeah, like if he has to switch on to an elite wing, is he going to be able to guard him and get a great contest? Like, no, I don't know that he necessarily would. But he's a lot better. I would say he's got a lot more skills than, say, like defensively, than like Jamal Murray, who's someone
Yes.
kind of similar size. Like he actually makes plays, and he's smart, and he's strong, and he's got pretty good short area quickness. So it actually wouldn't surprise me if he ended up being very good. And unless he just is lazy as hell, he'll be a quality defensive player for a point guard for this player type, to be sure.
And so we have it out there. Harper, 43 steals on the year, 2.6% steal rate, which you're pretty happy with that. And I agree with you. There could have been more. And then the Rutgers played a lot of freshmen. It didn't seem like they had a lot of accountability stuff. And that falls some on the players as well. But he has the building blocks. And of course, his dad was a wonderful defender too. And he knows the
Although,
game.
interestingly, his dad was a bad defender until he reinvented himself. Like the Bulls signed him in free agency to replace MJ, and then he basically didn't play, was totally overpaid, and then reinvented himself as a defensive guard when MJ returned. But he didn't try at all before that. It was like, for him to do that as he got into his 30s was actually a big surprise, I would say. So hopefully history won't repeat itself, and Dylan Harper will be better. But he definitely, I've seen him flash that mentality before. That's why I thought the Hoop Summit was really valuable. So I'm not worried about it. I'll put it that way, and it could actually be good.
No, and something we've seen in these playoffs, it's one of the biggest strengths, maybe the single biggest strength of the Oklahoma City Thunder, other than having the reigning MVP on the roster, is not having any weak points. And so you see how that can work for a team. And if you could do that while bringing these other positives to the table, it makes things so much more potent. And let's say theoretically he ends up in San Antonio. That is something that they could really use to their advantage.
All right, let's go through a few comps here. And I went down memory lane to look at guys who were drafted highly in the top 5 or so. I'll throw a few names out there we can kind of talk about them. And we'll try to remember what these guys were as prospects. Do you like him better or worse than Scoot Henderson at this stage?
I like him better than Scoot. Of course, it's remembering that Scoot Henderson, you're just trying to forget what they were, but I like the mentality stuff with Harper better. I think that, and Scoot is a little bit smaller. So Scoot was listed 6. What I have his measurements at is 6'2", 195 with a 6'9" wingspan. So Harper is bigger than him, and Scoot could make shots in the G League Ignite. Like the jumper wasn't really there. He had some weird stuff with injuries. So I liked Scoot a lot. I like Dylan Harper more.
Wow. All right. That is high praise, because I remember you being pretty high on Scoot. I was maybe was higher. And, I thought he was the clear number 2 in that draft. I actually liked Scoot's jumper better at the time. I liked his athleticism better. In retrospect, I was probably too high on his athleticism. He had the big hands. I thought he would turn into a good finisher. That hasn't necessarily been the case. So I was too high on Scoot. I still think he could be a very good player, and it wouldn't even totally shock me if he becomes an all-star. I would say I probably was higher on Scoot than Dylan Harper, just because of the jumper. I think I just like Harper's form scares me. I think if he just had normal shooting for him, even with the same percentages that he had, I would probably say maybe he could be higher than Scoot. But he knows how to play better. I think he's got a little bit more basketball character than Scoot. Not that I would say even Scoot is bad in that regard.
The thing that I think puts Harper over Henderson for me is the passing as an overall package, mentality, vision, vocabulary. Those were things that I liked but didn't love about Scoot, and I really like those about Harper.
Yeah, maybe Harper's a little bit better as a passer. He also has the size to make that tell, and so yeah, I mean, I'd say they're pretty close.
Yes. Oh, very close.
And then this is actually kind of a funny one, Danny. I think that maybe he is what people who liked Killian Hayes thought that Killian Hayes would be.
Oh, that's hard for me because as some may remember, I truly despise Killian Hayes as a
Oh, me too.
prospect.
I mean, I don't
But
know. I won't say I despised him. Like I thought he would be a starter, but yeah, I didn't get
oh,
the whole. But like Dylan Harper is just way quicker, way better handle, can go right, better passer. All those things. What about LaMelo? Much different player.
much different player. I it's funny. I did go back and read my Lamelo scout same year as who's the guy we were just talking about. Killian Hayes. I because it's funny because I love Lamelo's passing too. I think of them as probably pretty similar too. I had fears about Lamelo's jump shot, thought that his form was wonky. Um, I that's a really close call for me. Me
Not for me. Not for
was
me.
okay.
I would have Harper well above
Okay.
LaMelo as a prospect. I liked LaMelo at number one because I felt like he had the upside and he had some of that ball handling and shooting magic. But he shot 25% in Australia. He
Yeah.
had this itinerant story before that. He only played like 25% of the season in Australia. And so I thought there was some upside there, but he also was a weird player, a non-serious player. Like I think one thing that I really like, I think Dylan Harper has a really high floor and
Sure.
like
Yeah, I agree.
he's just vetted in every possible way an American prospect can be at this point, other than making the NCAA tournament. But like he played well in college. He was one of the best guys in the all-star games. He was one of the best guys in high school, played all the AAU stuff. He's just a very seasoned guy who knows how to play and just is not going to like make a ton of mistakes or anything like that. Like he's not going to go out there and be like an unserious wreck of a player. And so yeah, I would say I have him above LaMelo. I would probably have him lower than John Morant. I
I would
loved
have him
John
lower than
Morant.
John. I mean,
Just because Ja was so ridiculously athletic and so talented, and uh,
well, and you and I both, I remember how much we gushed over John Morant's his passing acumen for a guy who's as athletic as he was, and that the ways that could really work for him. I remember really disliking Ja's defensive film, but no, I mean, and John Morant went number two, but really love Ja.
yeah. Now it wouldn't shock me if Dylan Harper is just a more valuable player because Ja is just small and it's hard for small guys to be effective, and you have all these defensive concerns. Darius Garland, we just didn't see enough of him
Yeah.
really. So Harper would be way above him. Trey Young, I would probably have Harper above Trey, even as someone who had Trey number two on my board that year and was so impressed with his shooting and pass. I mean, Trey is one of the best college passers I've ever evaluated, maybe the best college passer I've ever seen. Like Dylan Harper isn't quite on that level, and he's 5 inches taller than Trey too. And Lonzo Ball, I think I would have him ahead. Hilariously, De'Aaron Fox. that's gonna be real interesting. But I would have him ahead of Fox. Fox was a great athlete, but and I would actually say I was probably more of a believer in Fox's jumper, even if the percentages were worse because there wasn't anything super wrong with the form. But also, like didn't have this type of handle, didn't have this sort of passing vision, still doesn't. Frankly, like I think Dylan Harper will be a better passer than De'Aaron Fox the moment he steps into San Antonio's facility, if that's what the pick ends up being.
And I think when it ends up being a mistake, I think I'd have Markel Fultz over Fox, or not over Fox, over Harper as a prospect. I just love
Yeah, yeah,
his
yeah, because
ability
he
to
was
create
he was
separation.
just like same size, but just like so many moves, such a great scoring talent, had the outside shot. Like I was very high on
And
Markel
and
Fultz.
and speaking of guys that I was high on, I had Dante Exum number one in that draft class, in part because Joel Embiid got hurt. I would have had Embiid number one.
Yeah,
But that was more because I didn't like Jabari Parker as a prospect, rather than thinking that Exum was a surefire on-ball star. I would have Harper over Exum.
Yeah, especially because like Harper's handle is just so good for his size. A couple other guys you could throw out there, Luka Doncic. Obviously, I would have him below Luka Doncic,
Yes.
even what I thought of Luka as a prospect. And then I thought maybe the best comp for him out of all of these guys, and I didn't necessarily see it at the time because I saw Cade as a small forward. I still almost kind of do. And but in terms of some of the physical characteristics, I would actually say, his handle is better. He's got more moves than Cade at this stage. I think he can even get to spots better than Cade. Cade, though, has a little more size and strength and wingspan, and he's like a true small forward size. Cade had more defensive potential. Dylan Harper's not coming in like blocking shots on a help side or like posting up. And then the biggest thing is that I really was a big believer in Cade's jump shot,
Yes.
where I'm just not with Harper. But they have somewhat similar games in terms of just big point guards, going to handle the ball a lot. And that's probably close to the upside potential for Dylan Harper, but he's just got to figure the jump shot. He's got to figure out a way to score from mid range. Got to figure out a way to score reliably from three. Like Cade, I thought he was shooting like 41% on threes. Like, so I would have had Cade at the time above Dylan Harper. Also, even though I thought of him as more of a small forward, like Dylan Harper is fast enough and has a good enough handle, and I would say he's probably actually a better passer than Cade too.
Oh yeah, I think I like the passing film on Harper better than Cade, but Cade, his size and the jump shot. Like one of the things that made Cade one of the prospects I really liked was the idea that even if it doesn't work on ball, he could still be a very good professional player. And that I the downside risk. I agree with you that Harper has a higher floor than most guys of his ilk, but I don't think he has a higher floor than Cade Cunningham did.
Yeah, so we'll talk in the future when we do San Antonio's off season, and of course, when we do some of these other scouts and our final board of how he would fit in San Antonio, and
Well,
Fox, Castle already being there, and those are
well,
those are very, very interesting decisions that they're
there's
gonna have to make.
there's only one thing that I'll say on it at this front, which is basically we haven't talked about Cooper Flag yet. So let's assume that kind of have the assumptions in place. If knowing what I know about Dylan Harper, it would take one hell of an opportunity for me to move the pick that could become Dylan Harper. Giannis might be that guy, but it would be an incredibly high bar because Harper the upside is intriguing, the floor is high, but the team control for the amount of time. I mean, this is going to be a 19-year-old kid, has a lot of room to grow, has seems like he has plays the right way, has a good work ethic. Even if there's some stuff in the film that was a little bit weird at Rutgers, we have this larger overall thing context to evaluate him, including the FIBA stuff and all that, which I didn't watch in this context. So it would be hard to move off. Like we brought all these guys we brought up. Those were guys that we thought of really highly in their class or in any
Mhm.
other class. So this is if he ends up being number two, this is a strong, strong, strong number two option in the draft.
Yeah. Well, and then with Fox too is like, if you just look at the history of the draft, even with point guards drafted in the top 5, the chance that they're going to be a better player. Now, Fox may have already reached his peak too. That's the other thing, right? But if you want to say you go back to like 2023 Fox, like the odds are against Dylan Harper, as much as I like him, ever having a season as good as that season from Fox, which I think people kind of forget how good that was because he was making every mid ranger that season. The transition was unbelievable. And I don't know that that is De'Aaron Fox anymore. Like, I don't know if he has that level of acceleration and if he's going to shoot that well ever again. Uh, the initial returns in San Antonio were not encouraging. That whole thing is just a huge can of worms. I kind of wish for San Antonio's standpoint they didn't have him and could just take Harper and pair him with Victor Wembanyama. We could just get excited about it. But this we'll save that for their offseason outlook. But he's a very good prospect. I'm excited about him. I think he's a worthy number 2 pick in the draft in most years for sure. All right, then that will do it for This one will be back tomorrow night on Playback, playback.tv/Nate Duncan. Or wait, no. Yes.
Yes, you got it right.
Playback.tv/Nate Duncan NBA. And they have a new sync feature now where you just put in the time that your TV is at in the game, and it'll just sync up our commentary directly to your TV. So it's easier than ever to sync up. Dan put out this awesome compilation of some of our best calls today that I highly suggest. So maybe we'll even post that in the feed here, or maybe we'll even post it on the end of this. But I think actually we'll have to be self-promotional because that's just what you have to do in this business. But I think if you compare our calls of those games to the actual announcer calls, I think ours are by and large better on some of them. So not some of them, maybe even all. So particularly for this type of audience. And then, of course, it's not just the big moments. It's all the analysis in between as well. I think it's the best way to watch a basketball game. That's why we do them. So I hope you will join us on Playback tomorrow for game 2. See what happens, the follow-on of that ridiculous game 1. Talk to y'all then.